Hi, it's Dayna, and I'm here with your divination for the new moon in Sidereal Sagittarius. The 2025 Sidereal Astrology Guide says, focusing on learning more about my convictions. Break down. If you can't hold it, let it hold you. Let it carry you. When you've done all that you know. So this is the 2026 Sidereal Astrology Guide. It is the ninth annual edition of your personal horoscope workbook. The best thing about this is you actually need to know nothing about astrology. I'm the expert. I know all the things, so I put them in this book for you. I walk you through the personal application of 1 year of astrology, month by month, transit by transit, so you can get a personal feel for what each month and each week brings for you. I've got some evergreen content in here, such as all of this dope information about each of the signs, what their ideal is, what their task is. And this is a way for you to get started with Sidereal and really begin to understand what it means for you, not just in the static sense of what your sign is, but how you are living this astrology every single day. And I'm a guide and walk you through it. I have been hyping myself up to record this episode of the podcast for a while. It's late because I've been traveling, so that's given me probably too much time to be thinking about what I'm going to talk about for this episode of the Divination for Liberation podcast. The title of this episode, it might seem a little thick and convoluted, but I promise you, by the time I finish talking about the astrology of this new moon, the astrology of December going into January, I'm going to make it plain for you and I'm going to make it make sense for you. Focusing on learning more about my convictions. The first thing that I really want to say about this moment that we're in astrologically is that this is a very marked shift for us in terms of what the sky has looked like for the past 2, 3 months versus right now. We have shifted from a predominantly water sky that was signified by a stellium in Scorpio, Mercury retrograde in Scorpio. Mercury is still in Scorpio and it's been there since October, Lord Jesus. Jupiter dipped into Cancer and Saturn in Pisces. Water is the body and bodily functions. Water, when we have transit through water signs, it's constantly reminding us that you are a corporeal being and that being embodied is inherently isolating. And the function of water in the sky or in the birth chart is to both affect other people in terms of influencing them emotionally, biologically, so that you can learn to be affected by your own body. One of the things that water has been teaching us and will teach us in 2026 as well is that when you are not felt, it is impossible to feel yourself. The process of becoming emotionally aware, emotionally intelligent, and just emotionally present to your own body requires for someone to feel you emotionally. It's kind of like you don't know you exist until somebody looks at you, and then somebody looks at you and you're like, "Oh, they're looking at me. I exist. What do they see?" It's the same thing with your feelings. In order for you to be emotionally intelligent and aware, in order for you to be emotionally available, you need to be felt. Somebody somewhere along the way in your life needs to be able to quiet their own inner emotional world enough to hear and feel yours. And when you don't get that experience, your possibility of emotions that you can recognize, that you can respond to, gets really, really, really narrow. So, the work of all of this water that we've been in and the work of the water in 2026 is how can you widen and expand the range of emotions that you have access to? And how does it change the shape of your interpersonal relationships, your communal relationships, and our society as a whole when you have access to a wider range of emotions? All right. Now that brings us to where we are now, which is a stellium in Sagittarius. So, a stellium is when there are 3 or more planetary bodies occupying a sign at the same time. And what that means is 2 things. One, it means that whatever planet is in charge of that sign kind of gets turned up to the max in the mix. Every planet or all of the planets in that stellium are looking to the planet that rules them. So if we have a stellium in Sagittarius right now, that means that Mars and Venus and the Sun are all looking to Jupiter for direction. Okay. But Saturn is also in Jupiter's sign. So now through the early to mid part of January, we are under a Jupiter dominant sign or Jupiter dominant sky, rather. When Jupiter is dominant, whether that's in your birth chart or in the sky, we are individually or collectively needing things to add up. We are heightened in our sensitivity to contradictions. And real quickly, focusing on learning more about our convictions. This is where we are at the crossroads in the midst of ever expanding contradictions. There are contradictions between what we have been taught, what we know and believe to be true, and this is what Sagittarius represents. Sagittarius represents your existing belief system that you impose on whatever you encounter. It's an existing interpretation that you impose onto any experience, information, or set of data. Remember, Jupiter's job is to form judgments and come to conclusions with as little information as possible. And the way that Jupiter does that is by, according to Sagittarius, applying an existing set of assumptions or belief system. But remember, this new moon period that we're in is about focusing on learning more about your convictions. And what that really means is understanding that things that you have taken as reality, things that you have taken as fact, actually are not fact. They are indoctrination. It is things that you have been taught. It is things that you have inherited. It's a context that does not come from your hyper awareness and presence to your lived experience in this moment. Those assumptions and those convictions are coming from your culture. You are 24/7, 365, like it's foisted on you. This belief about what it means to be a certain nationality, gender, race, or class. And these things may seem like truths that have been true forever and ever and ever. But the whole point of being under a sky that is full of immutable like this is for you to become aware of the contradiction. And the contradiction is focusing on learning more about our convictions. And that means discovering that what you believed to be fact is actually indoctrination, and that when you connect the dots based on a type of hyper awareness to your life, to your relationships, to your experiences, a pattern emerges that contradicts what you've been taught. Now, this could be religious, this could be political, this could be about capitalism, this could be about gender. What does it mean to be a man? Right? What is the belief you have internalized and have been indoctrinated with about what it means to be a woman? And how is your subjective experience of your present reality making you feel a contradiction and uncertainty that makes you question that conviction? It makes you question that belief. It makes you question what it is that you've always, quote, known to be true as fact. This is really about uncovering the fact that we, particularly in America, live in the most effective propaganda machine in the history of the world. Capitalists who founded this country have convinced all of us that freedom and democracy is what it means to be American when we are all, in fact, wage slaves who have the right to vote, but not the right to choose the candidates that end on the ballot. That's a contradiction, right? You've been taught that these are the ideals of America, freedom and democracy, but you can't even go to sleep when you're tired. How is that free? To me, that's the measure of freedom. Freedom is going to sleep when you're tired, resting when you are tired, and having food easily accessible when you're hungry. That's freedom to me. Now, that doesn't mean that you have somebody to cook it for you. It does not mean that somebody else is doing all the work, because that's still making somebody else a slave, right? It means that we have established communal structures where everybody, when they are tired, they can rest. And when they are hungry, there's food. So that's one contradiction. And it can be difficult to recognize, acknowledge, and accept that what you identify as fact is actually indoctrination and belief. And I think that that is like the fundamental issue with where we are in America politically and economically. We are at a crossroads where we are confronted with contradictions that are complex and too persistent to ignore, and too persistent to reconcile with old beliefs and what we already know and believe to be true. It's too persistent. It's not adding up, right? Anybody who is deconstructed from a Christian upbringing has already started this process. And the thing that likely led you to deconstructing is that the contradictions became overwhelming, and the patterns and truths that were emerging from your subjective lived experience were in too deep of a contradiction with what you had been taught. That's what happens to anybody who leaves a cult. In fact, this is why the piece that I wrote for 2025, which you can find at thepeoplesoracle.com, is titled Crises, Cults, and Contradictions. No one believes that they are in a cult until they get out of the cult. Everyone believes that they are just speaking facts and truth, because no one wants to believe that they're in a cult. No one wants to acknowledge that, because then you have to accept and acknowledge that you've handed over your better judgment to someone else, usually for the sake of their power and their wealth, right? Saturn is at the early degrees of Pisces right now, and everything in Sagittarius has been taking their turn squaring Pisces. The square between Sagittarius and Pisces is really interesting because they are both signs that are ruled by Jupiter. So both Sagittarius and Pisces are trying to catch the pattern, but they're using different tools to do that. Sagittarius, because it's fire, it feels entitled to have the world and even other people reflect their beliefs back to them. All fire signs tend to take things really personally. Sagittarius takes things personally by perceiving everyone and everything about as a statement about their own convictions. Sagittarius needs to be believed, and they do that by convincing, so that Sagittarius trusts themselves and believes themselves the most when other people agree with them and believe them. Being right is very important to Sagittarius in that particular way. This is why Sagittarius, I call it the pattern maker, because it's going around and stamping everybody and everything with their pattern, with the way they connect the dots, with the truths they believe, with the interpretation they find to be right. And oftentimes they don't make room for other people's interpretations. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Sagittarius in this moment serves a function, particularly for people who don't have fire or don't have Sagittarius, or their Jupiter is on struggle mode in their chart. They need this fire because this is what allows them to not be talked out of their interpretation and their truth. Every tool or element serves a protective function. And fire, by way of Sagittarius, serves the protective function of when you draw a conclusion or have an interpretation or you're assigning meaning to something, you feel protective of that and you just don't let somebody else come to you with a different set of facts or information and make you change your mind. Because when you've decided that you've been disrespected or hurt, someone can just come and tell you that that wasn't their intention and you're like, oh, right, yeah. When in fact, you're still hurt. So there needs to be some type of remediation. There needs to be some type of atonement or reconciliation of some kind. So Sagittarius serves a function, but the extreme of that is being dogmatic. And that means that even in the face of facts, or even in the face of a new experience that contradicts your belief to the point of making it no longer relevant, you still hold on to that. In your life, what beliefs are you holding on to in the face of overwhelming evidence, in the face of overwhelming new experiences? This may just be recent. What beliefs about your life, about your self-worth, about your capabilities, about the world that you live in, about the politics and economics of this country? What beliefs are being contradicted to the point that you have no choice but to focus on questioning your convictions? Pisces is the pattern seeker. Pisces is operating under the assumption that there's a connection between things. If an MIT professor of nuclear fusion was murdered just days before Trump media merges with a nuclear fusion company, Pisces, where Saturn is, says, is that just a coincidence or is there an actual connection here? What Sagittarius would do would be rely on their indoctrination, rely on their existing belief system. But Pisces is trying to help us connect the dots that shape reality. Saturn in Pisces, rather. And as the pattern seeker, Pisces is like, yeah, I see you want me to connect the dots by going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But see, here's this other thing that happened, this other thing I feel, sense, this other thing I've witnessed that seems connected to me. And if we add it into this picture and connect all the dots together, we actually come to quite a different conclusion. So between now and the full moon in Gemini, this is really a moment of uncertainty. And the uncertainty is because we are witnessing collectively and individually on a personal level new experiences and new information that is contradicting what we know and believe to be true. It's contradicting the narrative that we're fed. And it is our moment to sit in the uncertainty long enough to let a truth emerge. That's something that Sagittarius really struggles with. Sagittarius struggles with sitting with uncertainty long enough. I feel like the only sign that's really at home with uncertainty is Pisces, but that's almost to a fault, right? Because then they're not willing to accept any information or any conclusion. They're always like, I don't know about that, right? But each mutable sign, Gemini, Virgo, Pisces, Sagittarius, they all have this relationship with uncertainty. And because of the way the sky is now, that is being highlighted for us. What is your relationship with uncertainty? The Jupiter sign, the sign of Jupiter in your birth chart is often telling you what is the thing that you won't be talked out of. The Jupiter sign in your birth chart is also telling you when you have to make an assumption or form a judgment and you only have a few data points. What is the way that you connect those dots? What is the story that you take with you everywhere as the default reason, the default interpretation, the default context that informs how you interpret? If somebody avoids eye contact with you, right, that's a data point. What's the context that you bring to that? Do you bring the context that somebody's disrespecting you, Leo? Do you bring the context that somebody is intimidated by you, Scorpio? Do you bring the context that, it's your job to make them feel better, Taurus? I have on the Div4Lib Podia, I believe I have a post on there about Jupiter interpretations. I think I posted that. I'll drop the link in the description if I did do that, but I think I did that a little while ago. Anyways, focusing on learning more about our convictions. This is Jupiter in Gemini's moment. And this will be the last thing I talk about before I pull cards, but one of the defining, what's the word I'm looking for? One of the defining current events and cultural moments that is tied to Jupiter in Gemini, along with Saturn in Pisces, is large language models. And I want to share a couple thoughts, one that I've shared on Blue Sky and another that I have that's connected to that. And the thought that I shared on Blue Sky a few days ago was about art and people using AI tools and large language models in the creation of art. And the critique I had of that is AI and large language models are homogenizing forces of cultural hegemony. Because remember, AI can only derive from what already exists, number one. Number two, what makes art art is an individual artist creating within the limitations of their skill, resources, and experiences. Blind Stevie Wonder, who can play almost every instrument except for stringed instruments and bass and guitar. We get that music from Stevie Wonder because of his limitations, because when he has to record contusion on songs in this key of life, and the piano part is too complex for him to play, he brings in Gaines. I can't remember his first name. Phil Gaines, I think is his name, to play. And so we get this beautiful moment because Stevie Wonder, in his limitation, is using the resources of other artists to create this beautiful piece of music. Or a person who only has access to a few colors, or the art that someone makes when they first start out with a camera versus when they get deeper into their practice. And it's all valuable, right? But AI, whether it's talking about film, music, photography, whatever it may be, it's operating from the assumption that only that which already exists is art. What about the uniqueness of your voice? What about the limitations of your skill and knowledge? What is the art that you make from that place? And how does it have the imprint of your voice? The other thing that I think is really important is the resource aspect of it. If we think about the films that were made in the early 20th century, when they didn't have all of these forms of technology, right? It was filmed on tape that you had to cut and splice and overlap, and you only had a certain number of minutes. And it's those limitations of the medium and the limitations of the technology and the limitations of the artist that create the art as a reflection of that moment. You mean to tell me that the reflection of this moment in terms of art is AI generated voices topping the Billboard chart? Films made from AI derived large language models? Like, how does that reflect this moment? How is it's erasure. It's absolutely erasure. One of the things that I think large language models are a reaction to, not the creation of them, but the adoption of them without any discernment or scrutiny, is our discomfort with uncertainty. And it's that combined with the collapse of the hierarchies of trust we've relied upon to navigate uncertainty. I may not believe that we live in a democracy or have any affectionate feelings for any previous president, but the fireside chats that FDR did during the Great Depression and World War II served a function. And it was, I will be here to help you navigate this uncertainty. Sunday morning service, Saturday at the temple, or wherever your religious service was. It served a function. The clergy said, I will be here to help you make sense of these uncertainty and hold your hand through the uncertainties I have no answer for. So I always offer a warning during this season and this time of mutable. Be careful who you let interpret the uncertainty for you. Be careful who you allow to reconcile contradictions for you. Be careful of people who rush to alleviate the discomfort associated with contradictions for you. Because there is such a thing as dependency on someone else's judgment. This was the other thought I had, and this will be the last thing I say before I pull some cards. We are abandoning generations of students and children by outsourcing their education to large language models. We are abdicating ourselves of the responsibility to be present, transmitters of truth, safe spaces for curiosity for those who are students and learning. This is a generation-wide cultural abandonment that didn't really start with large language models, but I believe that it is the most logical conclusion from No Child Left Behind. Of course, we would arrive here. because learning is no longer about discovery. Everything is a product for capital. Your child's test scores are a product for capital. Your research, a product for capital. And when everything becomes a product, the process becomes irrelevant. And it is in the process where self-discovery, curiosity, revelations, improvisation, creativity, and new ideas emerge. The transformation is in the process, and we are outsourcing the process. This is such a moment to reclaim your power and right to make meaning for yourself. I talk about this in the 2025 Sidereal Astrology Guide and elsewhere, that the ultimate struggle for power when it comes to class, when it comes to race, when it comes to gender, is all about the power to make meaning. If I get the power to control how you interpret your body, if I have the power to control and determine how you interpret your experiences, I win the fight for domination. And with that, let's pull some cards. I've got my tarot cards here. And as always, we are seeking wisdom and guidance to usher us through this new moon period over the next couple of weeks. What insights, direction are available to us at this time to navigate this period where we are focusing on learning more about our convictions. We've got the Four of Wands. And the Four of Wands is about reaching a milestone of some kind. I'll never forget one time I was doing readings on Instagram, which I'm probably going to do sometime over the next couple of weeks during this holiday season. But I'll never forget, one day I was just doing readings on Instagram for people who were tuned in. And with me, I have kind of set meanings for cards that evolve over time based on my experiences with them. But particularly when I'm doing readings for other people, in that moment, the card will just speak loudly to me about something that I'd never associated with that card before. And this particular card came up in this same position, the Four of Wands, and immediately I heard that somebody was dealing with addiction. And it was a very specific message for them in this card that when you are on your journey of sobriety, success looks like trying again. It doesn't look like I went sober and I've been sober forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Yay, I win. It looks like, damn, I had a drink. Damn, I shot up. Damn, I went off on somebody. But I'm going to try again. 5 minutes from now, I'm going to try again. There's something about the Four of Wands to me that kind of redefines what a milestone means. We have these cultural definitions of success, cultural milestones that can be meaningful because it is a shared context that gives meaning to our age, meaning to our experiences, where other people can bear witness and see the celebration and see the success with us. But there are some milestones that are really, really, really personal. And not everybody is going to see and celebrate with you. I think one of the ways that this connects to this new moon for me is that a lot of times people struggle to relinquish outmoded belief systems because it is alienating to no longer interpret reality the same way as other people. It is alienating to exist in this shared context that comes from existing belief systems that people share together. It's terrifying and lonely to abandon that belief system, to abandon that shared context, to abandon that conviction. It's alienating. This is why people don't want to leave cults. This is why people don't leave religions. This is why people, you know, won't forge paths for themselves that they might be better suited to, because it's lonely to forge your own path. It's lonely to reject the existing indoctrination. It's lonely. So there's something in this Four of Wands for me about redefining certain things for yourself. I think this is also interesting within the context that we're in the midst of the Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, New Year holiday season, and it does not feel festive. It does not feel happy to me. And I've heard a lot of other people say this. And I had been reflecting on what was it like in the cultural moments where our cultural milestones and holidays and celebrations were evolving. The Puritans did not celebrate Christmas. They thought you were going to hell for celebrating Christmas, right? And eventually it became a major holiday in the States. What was it like in that transition where December 25th's meaning changed? What was it like in that transition where how the holiday was celebrated changed? And I think what we can learn from that is we have to be willing to question the things that we have been taught and the things that we have taken as for granted realities, because we have to create the new in our lives. We have to create what the holidays and celebrations will be. I know it's really trendy to be very to be anti Christmas, to be I don't celebrate the new year on January 1st, to be, you know, anti 4th of July and all of these things. And that's fine. But what are we creating for ourselves as ritual, as celebration, as holidays? And how do those creations require us to question our beliefs and our convictions? How do they require us to get curious about why we believe what we believe? And what experiences are we having now that will serve as a new context for what this time of year means, or for what the general experiences that you have in your life mean? Are you willing to risk alienation for the sake of truth, for the sake of authenticity, and for the sake of fidelity to your lived experience? Mm. We've got the devil and we've got the seven of wands. No, this is the seven of pentacles. Quite an interesting combination of cards, which I feel like we might have seen before. I'm gonna have to go look. Um, the devil is one of those cards that people have very strong feelings about. In its most neutral sense, for me, the devil is about remembering that you live in the material world. and that there are material consequences to everything. It's about being reminded that you have a body, and to be embodied requires certain things. This is making me think about the disembodiment of knowledge that large language models and Chat GPT and Sora, etc., represent. The disembodiment of knowledge, that somehow knowledge is something that exists separate from people, that knowledge exists separate from the person or people whose minds and experiences brought that knowledge forth. It's making me think about knowledge making as a thing that people do. Something becomes knowable because it exists in the minds of multiple people. How is it that we concede the territory of our minds in this moment because we cannot bear uncertainty? That we allow our own relationship with knowledge to become disembodied. The devil card can be harsh. It can be aggressive, particularly when we are constantly in a state of collective or individual disassociation. And I mean disassociation in the sense of no longer associating with what we are experiencing, to distance and separate what we're experiencing from who we are, right? But also disassociation in the sense as to not identify with a thing. When we are in that collective or individual state of disassociation, we absolutely become embodied, disembodied. And as long as Saturn is in Pisces, my friends, that is going to be harder and harder and harder to do. We've got the Seven of Pentacles here. And the Seven of Pentacles is a card of waiting. It's a card of time. The question that's coming up in my mind is, how do you know when you are right? Heavy, heavy emphasis on the word when. I mean that in the sense of time. Because one of the things about Jupiter and Gemini is that Gemini's function is as what I call the communal storehouse of knowledge. And they love learning for the sake of learning. They accumulate a wide variety of information and knowledge over the course of their lives. But in a personal sense, Gemini really struggles with trusting what they already know to be true. So this question of how do you know when you are right is really me asking, what is the threshold of evidence, knowledge, or experiences that makes you feel like you know enough to trust yourself? At what point do you say that you recognize the contradiction between what you know and what you believe, or what you're learning and what you already believe? You recognize the contradiction. But how much more do you need to see, to know, to experience for you to trust yourself? The devil card also often comes up around being triggered. And to me, being triggered means that we are projecting onto our present experience a past story where our nervous system and our minds cannot tell the difference between the past and present, right? Being triggered is like a fusion of time where time kind of collapses on itself and you're transported back to a significant moment as if it's happening now, but you're projecting it onto the now. Something about the present moment is triggering or setting off a nervous system chain reaction for you because your eyes, your mind, your body recognizes it as something from the past that requires you to react in a certain way in order to survive. That's what the devil card is for me. And I think in this moment, focusing on learning more about our convictions, it's about the way that we project convictions and beliefs onto new experiences, not just as a way to hold on to a belief, but because beliefs are embodied. Beliefs are physical, they're biological, they're nervous system. Beliefs aren't intellectual because a belief connects us socially to the group. Beliefs connect us to the group in a way that the group is always associated with safety and survival. Beliefs are not a conclusion that we've come to because we've had enough information to believe it's true. No, the first beliefs that we have are inherited because it doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel all the time. You believe that in general, snakes are dangerous. That is an inherited belief. And sometimes you learn fat meat is greasy on your own because you get bit by a snake. But because it's an inherited belief, your nervous system is wired to be cautious around anything that looks like a snake. It makes me think of like these cat videos with cucumbers, and cats will like jump out of their skin when they see a cucumber because their eyesight is really poor and it looks like a snake, right? So for me, that's Jupiter. They're forming a conclusion with as little information as possible because their eyes cannot give them the complete picture of what they're looking at. So they have to go in their files unconsciously and associate that shape and that color with something that's familiar to them. How does this function in your life? That's what this moment is about. This devil card is saying that the reason it's so hard for you to let go of belief systems that your experiences are very clearly telling you are no longer relevant is because you are constantly being triggered into projecting that belief system onto reality. You are constantly being triggered into projecting that belief system on reality because your housing is connected to whether or not you work. Your safety and your food is connected to whether or not you work. And so you just have some belief systems you can't even afford to question because it puts you in peril. It puts you in deprivation of your basic needs. And I think this is the most important thing to understand about capitalism, whiteness, and patriarchy. You are triggered into holding on to belief systems that contradict the reality that you actually live. Your body and your psyche is connecting dots and revealing truths to you about the reality that you live in, but you can't even accept it because your survival is constantly being weaponized against you. That's the real truth that we're dealing with. This is going to be ongoing. We're going to get to a Pisces stellium between March, April, and maybe May, I believe. And we're going to circle back to this conversation. Are you connecting the dots based on the story that you already believe to be true? Or are you making room for new versions of reality and new interpretations to reveal themselves to you. How do you override the trigger? How do you override the trigger that's triggering you into projecting things or convictions onto reality that are not in alignment with your lived experience? And that's going to be that on that. I'm Dayna Lynn Nuckolls. Thank you for tuning in to the Divination for Liberation podcast. I'll see you in a couple of weeks at the full moon in Sidereal Gemini. In the meantime, in between time, flu is wiling out. And so if you still got some masks, you should probably wear them. COVID is still relatively low in comparison to where it was the past 5 years. And that just makes me really happy. That doesn't mean there's no COVID. It just means that there's less COVID circulating. And I still think that we are going to see a little bit of a bump in cases the closer we get to January. But the fact that it hasn't really bumped up too much yet is pretty promising for me. It's promising for the long range predictions I've made about 2026 really being a major turning point for COVID. Unfortunately, we really have the flu to worry about. H3N2 is circulating right now. It is not the strain of the flu that the flu vaccine was created around, but I've understood that it still offers some protection. The real issue is that H3N2 is wilding out right now, and there is still mad H5N1 circulating in poultry flocks. I just saw in the UK, there's H5N1 in sheep. And this, unfortunately, is the perfect conditions for a reassortment that can cause a flu pandemic. I would really mask if I were you. I don't know that this is something that we're going to be able to stop. The Chinese astrology of 2026, the Yang Fire Horse, that combination of element and animal represents not very good for any lung-based disease or pandemic. So at the very least, I expect for flu seasons to continue to be rough into 2026 and throughout 2026. And at worst, we could definitely see bird flu H5N1 crossover into humans and be more transmissible. If you're on Blue Sky and you go to my handle at thepeoplesoracle.com, I posted a link to a recent in vitro study that talked about how H5N1 has evolved from the 2005 clade to the 2025 clade that's been circulating in poultry and dairy farms, and how the 2025 clade definitely shows improvements in attaching to human receptors. The reason why there has not been an H5N1 pandemic, even though there's been lots of poultry and dairy workers who have been infected, is because that particular strain is specific to attaching to receptors that birds have in their beak. And those receptors that are similar to birds in their beak are deeper in human lungs. So it's hard for the virus to get there. If H5N1 evolves to attach easier to human receptors in the nose and the upper respiratory tract, that's when we have a problem. And as long as it's a lot of flu strains circulating at the same time, the chances for that happen get really high. I've been talking about H5N1 since 2023, 2024, and my long range prediction has always been, as far as I'm concerned, we will not be in the clear until we get through 2027. And of course, we're here at the end of 2025 and we're having a really bad flu season. So I don't know, whoever you pray to, whatever candles you light and rituals you do and masks that you wear, I suggest you do that. In the meantime, in between time, take care of yourself, enjoy the holiday season, and I'll see you soon. Bye.